So first of all, good afternoon. I would like to thank for the opportunity of being here today. It has been very interesting to hear all this scientific background and insights on personalized nutrition. I'm going to bring a different perspective. So before we start, I just wanted to give you an overview of NewNutrition business. So we've been around for a bit over than 20 years, focusing on market trends, consumer insights, and strategy for innovation with food and beverage companies, with a focus on health and nutrition. So today I'm bringing you a consumer perspective and a more marketplace perspective on personalized nutrition, which we call personalization. And we combine it with fragmentation. So this is one of the trends in the marketplace, and they are literally driving each other. And they could be summarized in this consumer statement saying, I am unique, I want what's best for me, and my individual needs. So this is what's driving consumers and their wish for personalization when it comes to food and health. So they want to take back control of their health, of their diet, of their well-being. They have a growing belief that there is no one size fits all when it comes to diet and nutrition. So they perceive diet as a very personal matter. And they are using tools and technologies, so we saw some of them this morning as well, that allows them to experiment and monitor their own body reactions to the foods and the experiments in the diet that they're making. So this is leading to a fragmentation of the marketplace. And fragmentation means that there's a lot of niches now, a lot of different beliefs of what's healthy and what's not. And so because everyone has so much access and easy access to information and technologies, they can easily search and find out for themselves what they think is healthy or not. So they now have their own personal system of what they want to eat or not, what they think is best for them, and it's mostly based on how they feel. And we had an intervention this morning about that. So it's mostly based on what they think is good for them and not necessarily on medical diagnosis or scientific research in this case. And this fragmentation of beliefs is why so many smaller brands are taking a higher market share in the market these days. So before, it was very easy for food and beverage companies to predict what the mass market consumers wanted, so they could launch products and brands and achieve billions of dollars in sales in 5-10 years. Whereas now it's becoming a bit harder because there are so many different preferences, so many different groups, that it's becoming harder for brands to become mass market, so they have to start targeting the niches, these fragments of the marketplace. It's the slow death of the one size fits all. So what are some of the key drivers of personalization and fragmentation of the marketplace? There are many. I will focus on the key ones. And some of them were also discussed this morning and are fueling the loss of trust in experts. So everyone is seeing dietitians, doctors, and scientists with less confidence. They are not trusting the messages that come to the media and into the market, and they're doing their own research. So because they have access to technology like mobile apps, they have access to all sorts of media platforms, which many times give very conflicting messages as well, consumers are taking the matter in their own hands and they're making their own decisions. So for example, when we ask them what are they doing to learn more about diet and nutrition, the majority of consumers, almost 33%, says they take the initiative to read online and to read news about diet and nutrition. And only after that, 20% goes to their doctor or buys a book or in the end asks a nutritionist or a dietitian. So also almost as many as those that would ask their doctor would also use a mobile app, for example, to track their diet, showing that they want to take initiative to control their well-being themselves. So this is quite a change in consumer attitudes towards health professionals, and we can't really blame them. So as it was very well illustrated this morning as well, with all these messages that are around in the media, consumers are confused. They perceive that the messages about diet and nutrition are constantly changing. They hear one thing from a doctor, another thing from another doctor, one thing from a scientist, then 5 years later, it's the other way around. So there's a lot of discussion, for example, now about foods that are accepted as healthy, but in the past were condemned. And a perfect example of that are the foods high in fat that we were just hearing about this morning. So the majority are confused about what's healthy and what's not, and that's driving the lack of trust in what experts and health professionals and the science community is saying. So when we ask them, can you give an example of a food that you no longer know if it's healthy or not because of all the confusing messages, you hear from all over the world that consumers don't know if dairy is healthy or not, if eggs are healthy or not, sugar, butter, meat, fat. So a lot of foods that are no longer perceived by consumers are simply being healthy or not healthy because of all the messages. So this is really a big factor driving the need for control and unique approaches to diet and health by consumers. And because they have access to so many technologies, they see that health professionals, nutritionists and doctors that were once the only way of having access to scientific news, for example, or nutritionist data, they now can find this information and this data in many platforms. They can apply it to their life, they can test, they can monitor how their body reacts, how they feel, and they can make decisions for themselves. And this doesn't necessarily mean they can be grouped in, oh, I'm gluten-free, I'm vegan, I'm paleo, I'm doing a ketogenic diet. Many of them are picking whatever they think it's best from one thing, from the other, and they're making their own personal nutrition in this sense. So, and to illustrate a bit on how this fragmentation of beliefs when it comes to what do I want, what do I think it's healthy for me, you can now see that, for example, almost as many consumers think that meat is good for their digestive health, and almost the same number thinks is not. So it's really a lot of beliefs going on, a lot of self-diagnosis, and a lot of perceptions around diet and nutrition. And I know we've heard a lot about science this morning, and developments are very exciting and interesting and are the way forward in terms of investment, but consumers are not waiting for the science to take diet into a personal matter. So many of them are already taking the initiative to have a personal nutrition in the sense of making their own choices of what they think it's best for them. And it's not necessarily based on what the science is saying or even on what doctors are telling them. So when we ask them if they ever choose gluten-free foods, you have 25% almost always choosing gluten-free foods, and around 37% saying they occasionally choose gluten-free foods. So you would expect that at least 25% of them were actually gluten intolerant if they're always choosing gluten-free foods. But no, only 8% of the consumers that said yes and occasionally are gluten intolerant. So this really illustrates that they're not being followed up by a doctor or doing the tests or even making sure that they are intolerant before they make the choice of not having foods with gluten in their diet. They are taking the initiative of doing it either because they think it's best for them, either because they actually feel better, or just because they heard it's the healthy thing to do, so they just go along. So when it comes to personalized nutrition and all the advances in technologies and services, and in this case I'm focusing on DNA testing because that's a service that's now widely available for most consumers, and gut microbiome analysis tests. So what are some of the challenges that imply both consumers and the marketplace? So the big challenge at this moment, which doesn't mean that it won't become less of a challenge in the next years to come, it's lack of credibility. So both within the scientific community, we have a lot of scientists saying, and academics and doctors saying that it's too early to jump into conclusions, the evidence is not there yet, whereas others are very excited about it, are making claims, are supporting services and technologies that are interacting directly with consumers. So this, again, it's a mixed message that is going through, and that consumers feel apprehensive about. So there's a bit of a problem of lack of credibility when it comes to these services and in the moment. And for example, I have here a print screen of a news that happened in Chicago when a news station sent a saliva sample of a golden retriever to 8 DNA testing services in US and Canada. And okay, the good news is that 7 of them detected that it was a dog, it wasn't a human, but 1 of them didn't, and sent a full detailed report with dietary advice and exercise routines that the golden retriever should do if he wanted to lose some weight. So all these kind of messages are there and everyone can have access to it, and this is really fueling the lack of credibility that it's still surrounding this more technological aspect of personalized nutrition. And the other challenge, as I think we all understood from today's presentation as well, is the complex relationship between diet, health, environment, and in this case, our genes, our microbiome, our lifestyle. So there's a lot of factors that come into play. And sadly, at the moment, most of the services out there, they focus on 1, 2, 3, 5 the most factors. So even if they analyze several factors and several biological and environmental variables, they still lack the knowledge to know how they interact with each other and what it really means for consumers. So just because you have a genetic variant for something at this stage, it doesn't mean that necessarily you'll have an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. It's not there yet. So for some things like caffeine, there are studies showing that if you have a specific genetic variant, you might be able to process and to metabolize caffeine faster or slower. But for other things, it's still very complex. So it's very hard for companies to pass that message to consumers and for consumers to understand the complexity behind that. Concerns about data privacy are also a challenge when it comes to personalized nutrition and the services out there. So who will have access to the information? If I give a sample of my saliva, who will have access to see my genetic data? How will it be processed? And finally, the commercial practicability. So I'm again talking here more on a food and beverage industry perspective, and in terms of commercial practicability, it's hard to see personalized nutrition going beyond a niche opportunity, which it is at the stage, into a more mainstream opportunity for food and beverage companies. And as an example, I have Habit here, so I don't know if some of you are familiar with this company. It's from US, and in 2016, Campbell's invested around $32 million in this startup that offered personalized nutrition services. And at the beginning, they were really doing the full cycle, meaning they would do the DNA tests, and not only DNA, they would using other biomarkers as well and lifestyle factors too. So they were analyzing it, they were giving you the dietary guidelines to consumers directly. They were having some specialists like dietitians and nutritionists giving you and explaining you what those guidelines meant and what those recommendations meant. And then they offered you a full personalized menu, and they would do the meals for you, ready to eat, and they would deliver it to your home place. So it's really the full cycle of personalized nutrition. Like, you couldn't get more personal than that. You would have your own food based on your results delivered to your doorstep. But after a test in the San Francisco area, it became clear that it was a bit more complicated than that. First, to scale up, even in US, which is just one country, a big one, but one market, it was hard. So it was very challenging. The company had to stop the service last year. So they're now only doing DNA tests, recommendations, and follow-up with health professionals, but they no longer do the food service delivery part. And that has to do, obviously, with profitable reasons and strategical reasons, but simply it's challenging commercially to make this individualized approach, even if you're just doing it regionally, which was this case. So imagine scaling up to a country or to a continent. So it's quite demanding and it's quite challenging at the moment. So to look a bit more on the positive side, what can companies do at this stage when it comes to personalization in the marketplace? So if you want to look at the technological side, so obviously you have services that are being offered. Again, credibility, it has some challenges still, but they are there. They're in the marketplace, it's an opportunity, there are lots of companies investing in it, and obviously the important thing is to remember that the service doesn't stop once you deliver a report with all the genetic results or all the microbiome profile. You have to give ongoing support, and you have to follow up with customers and make them understand what that means. And the interesting thing is, for example, with gut microbiome, it can even change by the week sometimes. So it's really important to make consumers aware of this and understand that it's not, okay, I have this result now, and this will be my result for the rest of my life, so I have to change my diet like this for the rest of my life. It doesn't work like that. So this is important for companies offering these services to understand. And it's a niche opportunity, it's true. And depending on the market, there are opportunities bigger than others. So for example, this was again our consumer insight research, and in China in particular, we saw that DNA tests and gut microbiome tests are extremely popular, much more popular than, for example, in North America and Europe. And this doesn't mean, although, that all these tests were done for personalized nutrition in particular. So there are a lot of DNA tests being done in China for other reasons, even, for example, parents having their kids doing a DNA test to see which talents they have, or which type of, are they good for sports, writing, theater, arts, and then to invest in that, to promote that during their infancy. So there is a higher awareness about DNA testing, for example, in China, but then in other markets, the one, for example, we would say it's the most developed in terms of personalized nutrition and familiarity among consumers in US, only 19% said they actually did the DNA test. And doing the DNA test doesn't mean they will apply the results to their diet and lifestyle. So they might do it, they might try for a month, but if they don't have a proper follow-up and consumer support, they will stop making those changes unless they feel better and they think it's best for them, like choosing gluten-free even though they're not intolerant. Another way is to focus on dietary supplements. So again, if you look at food and beverages, it's extremely complicated to think that you can tailor a product easily to fit individual consumers now with the scalability and market complexity that there is. But if you look at dietary supplements, of course, it's an easier route. So there are already companies offering dietary supplements that are tailored based on individual results of some not so scientifically backed up measurements, but they are there, they're offering these products, and consumers, some consumers are engaging with this. So this again might be an initial step to take for companies thinking of investing in the personalized and personalization trend. Another important thing is to look at how to reach this niche consumers. So I mentioned that the market is fragmenting. There's a lot of beliefs going around of what's healthy, what's not healthy. So how can you actually reach these small groups of consumers? Well, e-commerce is a valid and many times the only route to do that. So thinking that in the next 5 years, you'll have all these different possibilities in mainstream supermarkets offering personalized nutrition options to consumers, it's a bit unrealistic. So there are other channels these days, and to target the niches, e-commerce is the most easy one at the moment. And also our social media platforms when it comes to bring awareness to consumers. So for example, I just have here an illustration of the impact that it can have with familiarizing consumers about certain nutritional terms. So here I have an example. It works. I have an example of a Brazilian influencer, so-called, on Instagram. So she's a health and nutrition influencer. She talks a lot about health and nutrition. She's not a doctor, she's not a nutritionist, she's just into fitness and healthy lifestyle. And she did a whole series of videos and posts about FODMAPs. So I don't know if, how many of you heard about FODMAPs, the term? Not so many, okay. So basically it's something that started being researched in Australia. And I think I was talking a bit further away from, yeah, was it okay? And it's about a diet avoiding certain foods that are high in these fructooligosaccharides components, and that would cause you and aggravate symptoms of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. So this is quite niche. So in Australia, it's gaining a lot of traction. In US as well. In UK, there are some food products already in the market with FODMAPs claims, but otherwise, in the rest of the world, it's quite unheard of still. But because this influencer or this online personality did this series of posts about FODMAPs on how her nutritionist advised her to try this diet and to see how it would influence positively her well-being and the digestive health, in the same week, these are Google searches in Brazil for the terms FODMAPs, and look, the peak in searches that you can see. So this really illustrates that when something goes online and has an impact, it can have a big impact on the familiarity and awareness that consumers have of this term. And that, I think, it's very important if you want to target niche groups within the marketplace. For bigger companies, obviously, if it's a market of niches, you have to have a portfolio that targets all those niches. So creating a portfolio of brands, that's what most of the major food and beverage companies have been doing, like General Mills, Campbell's, PepsiCo. They're investing in a lot of different brands, targeting a lot of different groups of consumers. So the billion-dollar brands are struggling, and the smaller brands are now owning the marketplace with smaller numbers in terms of sales, but slowly getting their percentage of market share. And this is what smart companies have to look at, to create a portfolio that targets niches. And finally, I know that when we talk about personalized nutrition, we immediately think of the science, of all the developments and findings that we have to take into account, and that's true in the scientific community and in the health professionals' worlds. That's absolutely right. But for many consumers, personalized nutrition or personalized diet or personalization, it's all about feeling unique and having a tailored product. So, for example, there have been many companies, like a German one, My Muesli, or now this Belgium startup. Oh, sorry. So this is a Belgium startup that offers consumers the possibility to choose exactly what ingredients in what amount they want to their own personal smoothie, or in this case, the My Muesli was very successful at offering personalized muesli products. So again, this is a different way of looking at personalization, but it's a way that for many consumers works, and they feel unique and they feel they have a tailored product for themselves. So to finalize, I would just like to pass the key message again, which is that for many consumers, personalized nutrition or personalization, it's about their own personal system of trade-offs. And it might not make sense, but that's what they're doing. And these are some insights, some quotes from consumers, and that really show you that it's really a fragmented market of beliefs, of behaviors, and it's very hard to predict and even to group consumers based on that. So you have vegan people that still eat eggs because they think eggs are healthy and they need eggs, so they're having eggs. You have people that don't have dairy products but would have kefir and yogurt because of the probiotic or good bacteria, how they call them. You have people that are not vegetarian but want to avoid meat at least once a week. So it's really fragmented, a lot of different beliefs, and companies have to be aware of that if they want to invest in a personalized approach to diet and nutrition. And that's it. Thank you.